When Abe Rollins saw his maid limping across the kitchen, shoulder hunched and hands trembling, he didn't step in right away. He watched from the porch, through the slats of the shutter, as she leaned on the table like every step hurt. Her fingers shook as she reached for the basin, and the way her body flinched at the creak of the floorboards told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't clumsiness. This was violence. The sun hadn't yet touched the horizon, and the morning air was still. But something in it had shifted, an invisible thread pulled taut. Abe stayed behind the shutter a little longer than he should have. Old instinct. Let things play out. Don't stir the pot. But as Laura wiped her hands with the same towel she used to clean the dishes, and pressed it just a second too long to her jaw, he stepped back from the window. 2 hours later, he was on horseback with a rifle slung over his back, riding toward town. No one knew yet, not the sheriff or the saloon keeper or the widow baking bread on the edge of Main Street. But Abe Rollins' quiet decision would shake the entire sheriff's office of Gravestone Springs to its core. Abe had lived alone for 15 years, ever since the fire took the two people he loved most. They'd buried his wife and daughter on the same day. That winter, Abe built the headstones with his own hands. Rough pine, carved with names and a date that no man in town ever brought up around him. Afterward, he stopped attending Sunday service. He stopped answering letters. When folks tried to drop by with food or company, he let the dogs bark until they turned back down the path. They called him the Southern Mute Wolf. Not because he couldn't speak, but because he never needed to. He ate what he grew. He drank what he drew. His boots rarely touched town dirt. Only when he needed salt or nails or rifle oil would he load up the wagon and make the trip, and even then he'd nod instead of talk. They said a storm lived in his chest. But truth was, the storm had passed long ago. What remained was silence, deep and hollow. He built his house by hand, put up the fences alone, dug his own well, and every year he marked the anniversaries by clearing the brush from their graves and planting something wild. Bluebonnet, yarrow, thistle. Something that would bloom without help. He hadn't looked at another woman since. Hadn't heard a child's laugh in over a decade. And before Laura came, he had nearly forgotten what a woman's voice sounded like inside his home. She'd brought it back. The sound of another set of footsteps, the whisper of skirts, the occasional song under her breath as she peeled potatoes or swept the porch. He hadn't asked for her. But when she came, he didn't send her away. Now, that choice felt heavier than he'd realized. Laura came in spring. She stepped down from a worn-out wagon with a single bag, tired eyes, and a quiet mouth. She said she could cook, wouldn't meddle, and wouldn't ask questions she didn't need answers to. Didn't ask where she'd come from, didn't press about what she was running from. The land had a way of wearing a woman down, and her shoulders bore more weight than her years should allow. He hired her. She worked from dawn till dusk, never late, never idle. Her stitching was neat, her bread rose high, and she kept to herself like she'd taken a vow. Abe watched how she moved, quick with a broom, slow with her own plate. He never saw her eat more than half what he offered. At first, he thought it was shyness. Then he noticed the bruises, a shadow on her collarbone one week, a cut on her palm the next. Nothing she ever spoke of. Nothing she winced at unless she thought no one was looking. But Abe was always looking. He saw how she flinched at sudden footsteps, how her eyes darted toward the door every time a rider passed the gate, how she kept a small bag tucked under her bed, always packed, as if she might need to leave with only a minute's notice. He told himself it was none of his concern, that she hadn't asked for protection, that whatever hurt she'd left behind, it was hers to carry. But that changed 3 days ago. She dropped a plate in the sink when a hawk screeched overhead. Abe had never seen anyone cry so quietly. She didn't sob, didn't make a sound, just stood there, shoulders trembling, as the water ran over her hands. Then, today, she came in from feeding the chickens limping, favoring her right foot. Her sleeve was tugged down oddly over her left arm. She moved like a woman who had learned how to keep pain hidden in plain sight. And Abe, standing on the porch with a mouth full of coffee he never swallowed, realized something simple and hard. This was trouble. Not imagined. Not past. Trouble had walked onto his land, and he couldn't look away. Abe didn't ask Laura what had happened. He just nodded when she passed him on the porch, holding her weight like it might spill. And when she shut the door behind her, he waited until dusk and took his rifle down from its mount. He moved like a man twice his age, slow and deliberate, careful with the way each boot touched the earth. Shadows stretched long across the field. He circled the hay shed, crouched low among the barrels, and waited. The stars came out one by one, and then the man arrived, broad-shouldered, tall, black leather jacket that caught the moonlight like a blade. He rode a dark gelding and didn't bother tying it off, just stepped off and walked to the wagon like he'd done it before. Abe recognized him immediately. Trey Harley, county enforcer, a man paid in coin and silence to keep the rough elements in line. Men feared him more than the sheriff. Rumors followed him like shadows, how he settled disputes with his fists, how he charged extra when the wronged party was a woman. Harley didn't knock. He walked straight into the wagon like he owned it. Abe's hand tightened around the rifle. 30 minutes passed. Long enough for a mouse to cross the field. Long enough for every wind to hush. Then Harley came back out. Laura followed a moment later. She didn't look up, just stood in the doorway, hand on the frame, and when she turned, Abe saw the mark. A fresh one, high on her cheek, red and ugly. Harley swung into his saddle like a man who'd earned something. Then he rode off. Abe didn't move until the dust settled. Then he stepped out from the shadows, walked to the wagon, and tore a scrap of fabric from the door, where Harley's coat had caught on the latch. It was small, bloody. He folded it once, tucked it in his pocket, and walked back to the house without a word. The next morning, before sunrise, Abe saddled his mare, strapped the old hunting rifle across his back, and set out toward town. He didn't leave a note, didn't lock the door. Whatever came next didn't need planning. It needed resolve. And he had that. The sheriff's office was quiet when Abe walked in. Just the sound of a pen scratching across paper and the low creak of Collins' chair. Sheriff Collins looked up. "Mornin', Abe." Abe didn't return the greeting. He reached into his coat, pulled out the bloodied scrap of fabric, and laid it on the desk. "It's from Harley's shirt," he said. "Found it outside my maid's wagon door. Thought you'd want to know." Collins stared at the fabric, his fingers hovering above it. A vein twitched at his temple. "Trey's not. He wouldn't," he started, then stopped. "You sure it's his?" Abe didn't answer, just looked at him. The silence stretched. Collins sighed and sat back. "Trey's done good work for this town. Kept order when others wouldn't." "That's not what he did last night," Abe said quietly. Collins glanced toward the door, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You understand what you're saying? You're accusing a deputy, a man with the law behind him." "No," Abe said. "I'm accusing a man who beat a woman." That was when the door creaked open again. Abe turned. It was Samuel Gaines, the town's blacksmith. He stepped inside, hat in hand. "I saw Laura last week," he said. "Saw the bruises. Didn't say nothin'. Figured it wasn't my place." Behind him came Ruth Calhoun, widow and baker. "I gave her bread 2 mornings ago. She couldn't lift the loaf with one arm. I should have asked." Then Josiah Mercer, owner of the dry goods store. "I saw Harley headin' out that way more than once. Thought maybe they had some arrangement. But I saw her face last month." One by one they came. Folks Abe had passed in silence for years, now stepping into the room like they'd been waiting for someone else to speak first. Abe nodded once. "He's been beating her. I saw it myself." Collins rubbed his eyes. "God help us." It didn't take long for Harley to arrive. He kicked the door open like he owned it. "You sent for me?" Then he saw Abe and his jaw clenched. "What's this?" he barked. "You callin' me a criminal now?" "You walked into her wagon like it was yours," Abe said. "You walked out like you'd punish someone." Harley scoffed. "She's mine. She knows that." That was enough. Abe moved faster than a man his age should. He grabbed Harley's wrist mid-draw and twisted hard, wrenching the pistol free. Harley stumbled, and Abe stepped forward, pressing the rifle's barrel into his chest. Collins barked, "Enough!" Harley froze. The room held its breath. Then Collins stepped around the desk, took the rifle from Abe, and turned to Harley. "You're under arrest." They put Harley in the cell that same afternoon. No ceremony, no trial yet. Just steel bars and the silence of a town that had finally found its voice. Laura gave her statement in the back room of the sheriff's office. Her hands trembled at first, but her voice never broke. She spoke clearly. About the first time Harley hit her, about the threats, about the nights she'd lain awake afraid to breathe, about how he said no one would believe her because he wore a badge. And when she finished, she looked out the window. Not at Harley, not at Abe, just at the sky. Then something unexpected happened. Others came forward. A young boy, maybe 12, stepped into the room with his mother. "He hit my pa," the boy said. "Made him sign over our mule when he couldn't pay a fine." A merchant told how Harley threatened to burn down his storeroom unless he handed over a share of his profit. A widow described how Harley rode by her land every month, reminding her what might happen if she didn't show gratitude. The stories piled up like dry wood waiting for a match. By sundown, it was more than one man's word against another. It was a reckoning. Abe stayed by the wall as Sheriff Collins slammed the cell door shut. Harley said nothing. His eyes, once full of swagger, now searched the floor like he'd misplaced the world. Collins turned to Abe. "You could have stayed quiet. Nobody expected you to get involved." Abe shook his head. "Didn't matter what they expected." The sheriff nodded slowly. "We should have done this a long time ago. But we did it now," Abe replied. "That's what counts." Outside, the street was quiet, but not afraid anymore. Inside the cell, Trey Harley sat alone, watching the sun set through a window he'd never walk past again. At sunset, Abe rode home in silence. The road felt different, lighter somehow, like the land had let out a breath it had been holding too long. When he reached the house, he found Laura sitting on the wagon steps. She looked up as he approached but didn't stand. For the first time, she didn't flinch at the sound of hoofbeats. He dismounted slowly. "It's over," he said. "He's not coming back." She nodded. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, but tears slipped down her cheeks. Quiet and unashamed. Not from pain. From release. Abe sat beside her, neither touching nor speaking, just letting the silence be what it was. Later, after the sky turned to ash and stars began their slow bloom, Laura rose and walked into the house. A moment later, a warm light flickered behind the window glass. She had lit a lamp, not out of fear, but because night had come, and there was no longer anything to hide from. Abe watched the glow from the porch, his hat in his lap and the dust of the road still on his boots. It was the first time in 15 years his house had been lit from the inside for no other reason than living. The stillness around him didn't feel empty anymore, felt like peace.